5:42 a.m. and I feel like the world forgot me. Just breathe.
5:42 a.m. The world was still dark. The timer on the stove had been beeping for 4 minutes. Sarah knew it. She heard it the way a drowning woman hears a distant shore, real but impossibly far. She was sitting on the cold kitchen floor, her back against the cabinet, knees pulled to her chest, eyes fixed on the white ceiling above her as though God himself might part it and reach down. He didn't. The baby was still crying upstairs. A thin, relentless wail that had not stopped since 3 a.m. The spilled milk was soaking through her socks, warm when it fell, now cold and clinging. The laundry basket in the hall had toppled again. She could see the corner of it from where she sat, a sleeve of Caleb's shirt draped across the floor like a white flag of surrender. She pressed her palm to her mouth so no one would hear her cry. No one was awake to hear her anyway. Her husband, Daniel, slept upstairs with the peace of a man who believed everything was fine. Because that is what Sarah had told him. Everything is fine. Or fine. She had perfected the performance. The warm smile at the breakfast table, the cheerful voice on Sunday mornings, the way she held baby Miriam during worship with such grace that the women in the congregation would catch each other's eyes and nod. Beautiful mother. Blessed family. Only Sarah knew that every Sunday morning began with her sitting on the edge of the bathtub, head between her knees, convincing herself not to disappear. Lord, if you don't help me, I won't survive today. The words came out broken, more breath than voice. Not a polished prayer. Not the kind she used to lead from the worship platform before Miriam was born. This was raw, unpolished, desperate. This was the prayer of a woman with nothing left to offer God but her honesty. The timer kept beeping. The baby kept crying. The milk kept soaking. And Sarah stayed on the floor. 6 months earlier, Sarah had been alive in a different way. She had stood at the front of New Covenant Church every Sunday morning, microphone in hand, eyes closed, leading 500 voices into the presence of God. People said the anointing rested on her when she sang. Visiting pastors would mention it. Her choir director, Brother Emmanuel, once told her, "Sarah, when you worship, the atmosphere shifts." She believed it then. She felt it. That electricity in her chest when the Spirit moved, that ache of joy too large for her body to contain. She had been full of God. And then Miriam came. She loved her daughter with a love so fierce it frightened her. But no one had warned her that the body could betray the soul. No one had warned her that after the birth, something in her brain would go quiet and dark, like a lamp unplugged. The joy did not simply dim. Vanished. And in its place came a fog so thick she could not see her own hand in front of her face. Postnatal depression, the doctor said at her 6-week checkup. She nodded and smiled and drove home and put the leaflet at the bottom of the recycling bin without reading it. She would pray through it. She was a worship leader after all. She knew how to get into God's presence. She knew how to stir up the gift within herself. But week after week, the gift felt like it had packed its bags and left. And Sarah kept smiling. Tuesday. The most ordinary, devastating Tuesday of her life. Started with the feeding schedule. She had written it out by hand. Miriam's feed times, the formula measurements, which bottles had been sterilized. She had stood at the counter for 2 full minutes staring at the paper and could not make sense of it. The numbers swam. She could not remember if she had fed the baby 40 minutes ago or 4 hours ago. She checked the bottle. She could not remember. She began to cry. Then the toast burned. Not because she forgot it, she had watched it the entire time, but because she stood there watching it and could not make herself move to stop it. Smoke drifted through the kitchen. The smoke alarm shrieked. Baby Miriam startled awake from her brief nap and began to scream. 7-year-old Eli appeared at the top of the stairs in his school uniform, eyes wide. "Mom? Mom, is there a fire?" "No, baby. No fire. Go brush your teeth." She scraped the toast. She heated a new bottle. She bounced Miriam on her hip while trying to pack Eli's lunch with one hand. She dropped the apple, picked it up, dropped it again, stood in the middle of the kitchen holding a bruised apple and a screaming baby and felt something inside her, some last load-bearing wall, begin to crack. She put on her coat. She drove Eli to school. She waved from the car. She sat in the parking lot for 23 minutes afterward, engine running, unable to remember how to drive home. On the school run, she had pulled up beside Jessica Moore, mother of 3, perfectly blow-dried, laughing at something on her phone. On the other side, Priscilla and Dawn were chatting through their windows, exchanging recipes, making plans for a coffee morning. They looked luminous, these women. Assembled. Oh. Sarah pulled down her sun visor. She looked in the mirror. Dark circles. A spit-up stain on her shoulder she had not noticed. Hair she had not brushed. She flipped the visor back up. That night, after Daniel fell asleep, she opened her phone and typed into the search bar, "Why do I feel like a bad mother?" She stared at the results for a long moment. Then she deleted the search and put her phone face down on the nightstand. She lay in the dark and listened to Miriam breathe through the baby monitor and whispered, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. You deserve better." She did not know if she was talking to her daughter or to God. It was the night of the panic attack that everything changed. Sarah had been feeding Miriam in the nursery at 2 a.m. when it started. The familiar tightening of the chest, the sudden certainty that the air was too thin, the world too loud, her own skin too small. She had learned to manage these moments. Deep breath. Count backward. Don't disturb Daniel. But this one was different. This one swept over her like a wave and kept coming. She placed Miriam carefully in the crib. The baby had finally drifted off, and backed away from the crib until her legs hit something and she went down, 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 until she was face down on the nursery floor, forehead pressed into the carpet, arms outstretched. It was the posture of surrender. She had not planned it. Her body simply knew. And then, from somewhere beneath the panic and the fog and the months of silent suffering, something broke open inside her chest, and she wept. Not the careful, controlled crying she did in the bathroom. This was different. This was the weeping of a woman who has finally stopped performing for an audience she thought was watching. She wept into the carpet. She shook. She pressed her face into the floor and she prayed. Really prayed, for the first time in months. God, I don't need you to make me strong. I need you to hold me while I'm weak. The words broke out of her like something damned for too long. I don't need a miracle. I just need to not be alone in this. I don't know how to do this. I don't know who I am anymore. I was your worship leader. I was the one who helped other people find you. And I can't even find my way to the kitchen without falling apart. She stopped. She pressed her palms against the carpet. I don't need you to fix everything tonight. I just need to know you're here. The room was quiet. Miriam breathed in the crib. Outside, a car passed. The house settled. But she was no longer alone on the floor. God, she would later say, does not always answer prayers with lightning. Sometimes he answers them with crayons. 3 days after the night on the nursery floor, Eli came home from school with something tucked under his arm, a folded piece of construction paper, slightly crumpled from his backpack. He thrust it at her with the casualness only a 7-year-old could manage. My teacher said to draw a hero. Sarah unfolded it. In the center of the paper, in purple and yellow crayon, was a stick figure with long hair and a cape. Beneath it, in Eli's careful new reader handwriting, "Mommy is my hero." She stared at it for a long time. Eli had already gone to find his snack. The paper shook slightly in her hands. She sat down at the kitchen table and pressed it flat with both hands and read those 4 words until they stopped blurring. Mommy is my hero. Not the worship leader. Not the woman who had it all together. Mommy. This broken, fog-walking, burned toast-making, floor-weeping woman. This was his hero. The next morning at the grocery store, she was in the cereal aisle. Miriam in the carrier, Eli running ahead, when a woman she had never seen before paused beside her. Older, warm-faced, carrying only a basket. The woman looked at her for a moment, really looked at her, and then said simply, "You're doing better than you think, sweetheart." Then she moved on down the aisle. Sarah stood frozen between the cornflakes and the granola, mouth open. The woman did not know her. They had never met. There was no logical reason for a stranger to say that particular sentence at that particular moment. Unless, of course, she had been sent. Sarah looked up at the fluorescent ceiling of the grocery store, not because she expected to see anything, but because it was the only direction that felt right, and whispered, "Okay. I hear you." Daniel noticed on a Friday. He was getting ready for work, jacket on, keys in hand, when he turned to say goodbye and really looked at his wife for the first time in weeks. Not the glancing look of a busy man. The real kind. Sarah was standing at the kitchen counter, both hands wrapped around a mug of tea, eyes fixed on nothing. She had not heard him come in. The tea had been sitting long enough to go cold. He put his keys down on the counter. He startled. "Oh, sorry, I didn't hear you. I thought you'd left." "Sarah." His voice was different, quiet, careful. "How long has it been this hard?" She opened her mouth to say it. The usual, "Fine," or "fine," and could not. Something in the way he was looking at her, the keys on the counter, the work jacket still on, the completely still way he was standing, she could not say it. Her throat tightened. Her eyes filled. "Daniel," she said, and her voice cracked in the middle of his name. He crossed the kitchen in 3 steps and put his arms around her, and she pressed her face into his shoulder, and she told him. Everything. The floor at 5 a.m. Panic attacks. The grocery store parking lot. The months of pretending. The weight she had been carrying alone while he slept peacefully 2 feet away. He held her the whole time. He did not interrupt. He did not try to fix it. When she finally finished, they stood there in the kitchen for a long moment. Then he pulled back and looked at her face. Really looked at it. And she saw something in his eyes she had not expected. Grief. "Babe," he said. "Why didn't you tell me it was this hard? I didn't want you to think I was failing." He shook his head slowly. "You are not failing. You are carrying too much alone. That's different." He took her hands. He bowed his head. And right there in the kitchen, with the cold tea on the counter and Miriam beginning to stir upstairs, Daniel prayed over his wife. "God, heal my wife's mind. Restore her joy. Forgive me for not seeing sooner. Help us carry this together. You said 2 are better than 1. Hold us both. Amen." He called his office. He took the day off. He washed all the dishes. It was, Sarah thought, one of the most profound miracles she had ever witnessed. Recovery, Sarah discovered, is not a moment. It is 1,000 small decisions. She saw the doctor. She accepted help. The kind of help that came in a small prescription bottle she had once been too proud to consider. She stopped calling it weakness and started calling it treatment. She joined the Mother's Circle at New Covenant Church, a Thursday morning group she had always been too busy to attend. The first time she walked in, she sat in the back, ready to perform fine. But Sister Grace, the group leader, began the session by saying, "Let's start honestly. Who is struggling this week?" For hands went up immediately. Then a 5th. Then a 6th. Sarah raised hers. She started speaking slowly. Then she could not stop. And when she finally finished, hands shaking, voice thick, Sister Grace simply said, "Thank you for trusting us with that." No one looked shocked. No one looked uncomfortable. Several women nodded. One reached across and held her hand. "You're not the only one," the woman said. She was not. That was the morning Sarah finally understood. She had not been failing at motherhood. She had been suffering alone. And suffering alone is not the same as failing. Daniel took over chores every Tuesday and Thursday evening. He got up for the 3 a.m. feed twice a week. These were not grand gestures, they were steady ones. And sometimes steady is what saves a life. Slowly, quietly, like the first light of a winter morning, joy began to return. Not the loud, electric joy of the worship platform. Something deeper. Something humbler. The joy of watching Miriam grab her finger. The joy of a cup of tea drunk while it was still hot. The joy of a Thursday morning surrounded by women who were also just trying to get through the day and finding God in the trying. It was a regular Sunday. 3rd Sunday of the month. Testimonies before the sermon. Sarah had not planned to stand up. She was sitting in the 3rd row with Miriam in her arms, Daniel at her side, when Sister Grace, seated 2 rows ahead, turned and caught her eye. She did not say anything. She simply held Sarah's gaze for a moment, then looked toward the front of the church with a slight tilt of her head. Sarah looked at Daniel. He reached over and took Miriam from her arms. He looked at her with an expression that said, "Go." She stood. The walk to the front felt like the longest walk of her life. Longer than her wedding. Longer than the walk to the hospital when labor began. This walk cost something. She stood at the microphone. 500 faces. Friends who had watched her worship for years. Women from the mothers group in the third row, already leaning forward. Sister Grace with a hand pressed to her heart. Sarah took a breath. "I was a worship leader," she said. "I led you into the presence of God every Sunday morning. And for the last 8 months, I couldn't find my way there myself." The church went very quiet. "I had postnatal depression. And I didn't tell anyone. Not my husband. Not my pastor. Not one person in this building." She paused. "Because I thought that being a strong Christian woman meant never letting anyone see the floor you've been sitting on at 5 a.m. She saw 3 women in the congregation begin to cry. Then 5. Then more. "God didn't heal me with a miracle," she continued. "He healed me through my son's drawing and a stranger in a grocery store, and my husband washing the dishes, and a room full of women on Thursday mornings who said, 'Me too.' He healed me slowly and ordinarily and completely." She looked out at the congregation. "I thought motherhood was supposed to make me strong. But God used motherhood to teach me that it's okay to need Him." She stepped back from the microphone. The church was silent for a moment. Then someone in the back began to clap. Then another. Then the whole building was on its feet, and women were reaching for each other. And somewhere in the third row a circle of Thursday morning mothers were standing with their arms around each other, weeping and laughing at the same time. Sarah walked back to her seat. Daniel put Miriam back in her arms. The baby looked up at her with wide, dark, New World eyes. And Sarah, finally fully for the first time in 8 months, smiled. That evening, as the sun set low and orange through the nursery window, Sarah stood holding Miriam. The room was warm. The house was quiet. Daniel and Eli were downstairs, watching something on television and laughing about it, the uncomplicated sound of a family at rest. She rocked her daughter slowly. She thought about the kitchen floor, the spilled milk, the 5 a.m. prayer that had felt like throwing a stone into darkness and not knowing if anything was there to catch it. She knew now. Something had caught it. She pressed her lips to the top of Miriam's head and whispered, not as a prayer this time, but as a testimony. "When a mother breaks, heaven bends to catch her." The last light moved across the room. And the darkness did not have the final word. The end. If this story touched your heart, share it with a mother who needs to know she is not alone. You're doing better than you think. And heaven is closer than you know.